Thank you very much, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. It's late in the day, but it's really nice to be able to talk a little bit more what keeps me busy during the days and my areas of responsibility. And of course, you've heard during the day a little bit about how we work with decision shaping from the EFTA Secretariat's side. And since we are not involved in the formal decision-making process, of course, on the EU side, the decision shaping is very important to us. And you've heard mentioned that we do participate in expert groups, we do participate in comitology committees, we do assess and look at the proposals at the very early stage. And I would like to add as well, actually, that we do have EEA EFTA national experts that are seconded to different DGs in the Commission. And this network of national experts is actually also a very important source of information for us, what's going on, what's coming up. But of course, they're also there in one way. They have an opportunity to talk about the EEA and the priorities of the EFTA states inside the institutions as well. But what I'm going to focus on today is EEA EFTA Comments. And I'm going to do that in the context of the digital agenda, EU's digital agenda. My name is Trond Helge Baardsen. I work in the Internal Market Division at the EFTA Secretariat, and I'm mainly responsible for everything related to electronic communications, audiovisual services, e-commerce, cybersecurity, data protection, everything related to digital, basically. The first thing I want to say is that when you look at what the EU is doing in the digital area, there is a lot of overlap with the interests of the EEA EFTA states. I mean, if you look at the problem analysis, which was presented back in February 2020, and the EU digital strategy, Shaping Europe's Digital Future, I mean, a human-centered development, basically that technology should work to the benefit of citizens, that we should ensure fair, open markets, that we should somehow counter the market power of the tech giants, if you want to. And also, with regard to sustainability, that the digital transformation should support the green transformation, and that we should make sure that technology also contributes to achieving the targets, the ambitious targets in the green area. This is very much aligned with our kind of overall agenda as well on the EFTA side, if you want to. And then there are three kind of headings: data, artificial intelligence, and online platforms, where the Commission is presenting a lot of new initiatives, legislative proposals, and where we are working very actively from the Secretariat side, monitoring this initiative and discussing potential challenges and also opportunities to influence perhaps how these initiatives turn out in the end after the legislative procedure is over at the EU side. I'm going to focus today on the online platforms, which is kind of the centerpiece of this Commission's digital agenda, if you want to. But there are many initiatives here that are very important to us as well. It's all internal market relevant. It will go into the EEA agreement at some point. And that's, of course, why it's so important for us to know kind of what are our interests, what are our stakes in these initiatives. I want to mention AI and data to start with, because we've already issued an EEA EFTA comment on the AI and data strategy. We did so last year in June 2020. And that was, of course, when the Commission published its kind of white paper and also its strategy on data. And here, of course, we said some things that we do support, that we create a common market for data in Europe. Basically, that data should be able, both personal data and kind of industrial data, data produced by all kinds of objects that are connected to the internet, that data should be able to flow more or less freely within the EEA, but of course within the boundaries set by the General Data Protection Regulation, the Cybersecurity Regulation, the acquis that is in place to secure that data flows securely and in respect of data protection. We also expressed support for a risk-based approach to artificial intelligence. And of course, now you see when the legislative proposal came out in April this year under the AI strategy, it is this kind of risk-based approach to artificial intelligence, whereby actually you recommend to regulate high-risk applications more strictly, whereas kind of normal things we use in everyday life, like translation tools, or whenever we engage with a chat robot, when we use a public service, for instance, that those kind of services don't have such strict regulations. But I do recommend, as it was said earlier today, that you actually visit our homepage and that you have a look at all the comments we issue, and you will find this comment as well from last year. Just to lift the perspective a little bit before I go into the substance. I mean, yes, EEA Comments, of course, they are common position papers that we agree on, the EEA states. They can be issued during the early phase, the consultation phase, as I mentioned for this white paper on artificial intelligence. They can also be issued after the proposal has been presented by the Commission, or throughout the kind of co-decision procedure when these are being discussed by Parliament and Council. We'll come back to this a little bit. They are submitted very broadly to the EU side. I mean, formally to the EAS, but also to the relevant DGs, the European Parliament, often the current and also the incoming presidency, depending a bit on when we actually issue them. But very important, I think, the last point, which I want to emphasize, that these comments are also kind of a platform for engaging with the EU side. We do invite the Commission, for instance, to our expert group meetings. We discuss the issues that we raised in these comments. And also it's so much easier in one way to get back to the EU side once you have kind of some position or you've said something about a proposal or a strategy at a later stage. So this is just how it looks at our homepage if you visit, and you will find all the comments that we have issued on this page in chronological order. So that's for you to check out later. So let me dive a bit into this platform economy or the proposals to regulate the internet economy, because that's basically what this is about, these proposals from the EU. So we have the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. They were presented towards the end of last year in December, and they are currently being fought over, to put it like this, in Council and in the European Parliament. The Digital Services Act, to put it very bluntly, is the new traffic rules for how illegal content and harmful products should be removed from the online platforms. So that's both kind of things that are posted at Facebook or through Twitter, but it's also kind of products that are sold via Amazon. It encompasses communication services like WhatsApp, etc. Right? So those are the rules on content and illegal products and the procedures for removing them. And then the other part, the Digital Markets Act, is basically about addressing what very many people today see as kind of systemic imbalances in the digital economy. Basically, that there are a few big actors, often referred to as the GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, that are basically able to set the terms and conditions for third parties that distribute services or products via these platforms. And the overall goal is, of course, to create a trustworthy, competitive European platform economy. The Digital Services Act, it amends what is called the ECommerce Directive back in time to 2000, the year 2000. So this directive is very old. Of course, a lot has happened in the digital world since the year of 2000, when we were basically just sending some emails to each other, the few who did even that. And What the Digital Services Act does is that it preserves some of the key building blocks of this e-commerce directive. Basically what goes or is related to the country of origin. So a provider that is based in a certain country can provide to the whole of the EEA if it complies with the law in the country where it is established. Limited liability, which means that once the platform knows that a content or something is illegal, it takes expeditious action immediately to remove that content, then it will not be liable for it. And also a general or a kind of ban on what's called general monitoring, that the platforms should not monitor every piece of content or services, products that appears on their platforms. So it preserves these general principles, but then it introduces kind of new procedures. Well, once this illegal content is discovered, how should it be removed? What kind of rights do we have to oppose that it is being removed? And also for online marketplaces, it introduces new requirements so that the platform actually has to know who sells products via the platform. So more transparency on this. And there are new cooperation mechanisms among the member states that are also being introduced. It's an asymmetric way of introducing these due diligence obligations. So for instance here, on the right side, for me then, opposite for you, you have kind of the very general categories that are kind of just access providers, internet service providers, just provides a cable to your home. They will have a lower set of obligations. Then the more you contribute to kind of value add in the ecosystem, the more you interfere, if you want to, or the more you kind of edit content or actually sell products, then you are covered by a stricter set of obligations. The Digital Markets Act, which I said to begin with, is basically about competition. It's basically what competition law has not been able to achieve so far. So what it does is that it already defines what are kind of core platform services. It includes marketplaces, app stores, search engines, social networks, e-commerce, e-communication services, a wide range of what we usually use in our everyday life, each and one of us. And then it says that some of these platforms that provide those kind of services are so big that they are entitled to be called kind of gatekeepers. They connect so many large businesses, large number of businesses with such a large number of end users that they can actually set terms and conditions for these business customers. And this you have this threshold, right? They are basically introduced to make sure you capture the very biggest player and the largest players. Usually we talk around 10 perhaps online platforms that would fall under this, or 10, 15 perhaps, depends a little bit, that would fall under this regulation. And of course Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Alibaba, Booking.com, don't know exactly perhaps, but these are kind of the things that is now up also for discussion, of course, between the co-legislators. The special thing is that these actors will then have some very specific obligations. For instance, they will have to allow business users to access the data they generate when using the gatekeeper platforms. Also, businesses that sell via these platforms should be able to market or address their own customers directly outside the platform to market their offers. And the gatekeeper platforms will not be allowed to treat their services and products more favorable in ranking, for instance, than similar services offered by third parties. So this is completely new. This is the first time in one way in the world that these type of call them sector-specific rules, but basically regulation telling companies like what to do and what not to do, kind of in parallel to competition law. And of course I want to use a bit of time now to also say what we think about this, because we are currently developing EEA Comments on these two proposals. And that's a very interesting process. We have not issued them yet, of course. We are still kind of with the digital service at the very late stage of consulting with our national experts. And then it will go to a higher level within the EFTA side to get it approved, this comment. But we have already identified some issues that are we have focused a lot on and that we are discussing a lot. One is that we are, from the EFTA side, quite concerned about extending the scope outside illegal content. So also introducing requirements for removing, for instance, harmful content, type of hate speech, or because we move into a very difficult area where there is a lot of freedom of speech considerations as well. We have some issues in the EEA states. We've had some examples in some of the EEA states where the big platforms have removed content that is contextualized. That it means that it's under editorial control. For instance, some newspapers have published a picture of a naked girl running from napalm bombs in Vietnam. It was taken down by Facebook and it generated a huge discussion. So we are quite concerned about editorial content. And also we are quite discussed a lot about micro and small platforms, for instance. We have a lot of very, very, very small companies in the EFTA states. I mean, this regulation, the Digital Services Act, uses some definitions of micro and small online platforms and has they are exempted from a lot of the extra obligations. It's quite an important concern for us to maintain this exemption. And some other issues as well that we have focused on. When it comes to the DMA, I touched upon it already. I mean, how many of these platforms should actually be subjected to these new requirements? Should it only be the very, very biggest one, or should it also be a larger amount of platform providers? There's a big issue, and that's also on the EU side, going on about enforcement. I mean, at the moment, the Commission is seen that should be in the driving scene for enforcing the proposed regulation. There's a question about how the national competition authorities should be involved, whether they should have an opportunity to also conduct their own investigations. These type of issues are very important also for our member states. And then there's an issue about this list, basically, because there's the list of obligations and prohibitions that the online platforms have to do. And from our side, it's an important, as it is foreseen now, a lot of this list, a lot of the revision will happen through delegated acts, for instance, where perhaps we don't have so much influence. And for us as well, it might be an important concern to also have more influence if new obligations are introduced or if new prohibitions are introduced. And I should have mentioned it on the previous slide with the Digital Services Act as well, but it applies to both the DSM and the DSA. This about the new governance structure being set up. I mean, we have for the previous one, we have the European Board of Digital Services, which is being established with representatives from member states. And we have the Digital Markets Advisory Committee being set up. And of course, it's important for us also to look at this one kind of powers these bodies are getting and how the composition of them will be. So this is issues we discuss a lot on our side. To try and kind of wrap up a little bit, so the EU legislative process is going ahead. We are now at this stage where both these proposals are being discussed in Parliament and in Council. In Parliament, there's a parallel process for the DSA and the DMA. They aim to discuss kind of compromise amendments, what is called, to their report in the IMCO committee, the Internal Market and Consumer Committee, which is responsible and the lead committee on the proposals. They aim to do so by end of October, and then perhaps to vote on their report in November, and perhaps in plenary in December. So it has a lot of momentum at the moment on the EU side, and also in Council. The current presidency, the Slovenian presidency, have said that they want to try and reach a general approach on the proposals before Christmas, and then leave it up to France to try and wrap it all up and conclude during the spring of next year. But this is actually, when we work with these EFTA Comments, it's very important to try and we need to monitor and follow this process very closely, actually, because we also have on the EFTA side, we also have our kind of administrative steps that we need to go through. From when we start, we make a decision in the working group, like in this case, the working group on ECASIS, Electronic Communications, Audiovisual Services, Information Society. Catchy name when you read it all out. And there we first, of course, make a decision when we decide to draft a comment. But after that, we have to go through all of these different rounds with consultations, and then before we kind of reach the formal approval on our side, and it can be sent and submitted to the EU side by the chair of the Standing Committee, which you had the pleasure to listen to earlier today. So we try to do so during September, October. It's not easy to be specific on the dates for these two proposals. The Digital Services Act will definitely come first, and that could be already very late September or very, very early October. But we, as I said, try to monitor for these milestones on the EU side all the time, so that we don't get too late for when they finish their process. Very last slide I had was kind of this, just to mention a little bit, this new communication that has come out on the digital compass from the EU side. It came in March. And basically here, the Commission is setting very ambitious targets in the digital area for 2030. For instance, that we should have 20 million ICT specialists. We have Europe has about 8 million today. Everyone should have access to gigabit capacity, and there should be 5G in all populated areas. 75% of EU companies should use cloud, AI, big data technologies based on this, and 80% of citizens should use digital ID. And I just want to finish by saying that, like, just related to this new strategy, or kind of complementary strategy, if you want, to the original one from February 2020, the EEA states are represented in the, it's called at the moment, the DSM strategic group, but it's kind of the steering group for these type of strategies. They are represented in something called special connectivity groups that works especially on lowering the costs, or sharing best practice on how to roll out broadband most cost efficiently. And we're also involved in kind of what's called the Digital Economy and Society Index, kind of that measures the developments and monitors how actually all EU countries, and also the EFTA countries, how we are kind of progressing towards these goals. And of course through program participation. And that's kind of what I want to end by saying before I hand over to my colleague, that of course a lot of this in the digital area as well, investments in high performance computing, high speed broadband networks, the skills part as well, and the digitization of public services, it will be realized through the program participation, and especially in this area, the Digital Europe program, and Horizon Europe when it comes to research on artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, etc. And in these programs, all the three EEA countries will be present. So with that, I think I end it, and I might hold this for the rest of.
No, keep your mic, because we have a question to you.
Yeah, but just so that
so
it doesn't slip.
Big thanks
everywhere.
to Trond. Yeah, it's super interesting and lots of things to consider. We have a question. Someone? You? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. So I'm Perrine. I'm the ECD legal trainee. I was wondering, in the process on working on those two digital acts, are you already discussing with ESA or with national authorities to anticipate how the supervision of those legal acts is going to take place?
Yes, I mean, we have a. You can still hear me, or it has fallen off a bit. Can I use the other one, or might be better actually? That's a proper one. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so as I said, in these consultation phases that we have on the Commons, I mean, the experts back in the capitals, they consult quite widely with the competition authorities, for instance, typically for the Digital Markets Act, and they're of course very, very concerned about kind of this enforcement issues. They again might speak to the networks they have, competition authorities, perhaps also get input from ESA. We don't get any direct input from them during the process. I mean, when we develop a comment, we first do it at expert level in the working groups, and then it's sent also when we are kind of finished with the job. It's also sent on a consultation again with the delegations here in Brussels of the EFTA states. And also there's a chance then to get more input also nationally. So the input is kind of fed in, but it's very much kind of a capitals-driven process. Oh. Oh, okay.
Yes, we have another question here in the back. So go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Ole. I'm the trainee at EFTA Secretariat. I have two questions. The first about the DSA. Okay. Yeah. So the first question about the EEA EFTA states' position on the DSA. Do you anticipate that the EEA EFTA states' position on this, and do you think that it would be taken into account and supported on the EU side? And also a little bit more general on digital policy. Are there any particular countries or particular of the EU institutions that are typical allies for the EEA EFTA states on digital policy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two very, very interesting questions. I started by saying kind of in the digital area that there is quite a lot of overlap as well when it comes to the kind of general direction that EU regulations should take. We have, for instance, and this might also be interesting, I mean, in this process we do work in a way where we, for instance, can have an informal talk with, for instance, some of the rapporteurs in the parliament. We can talk to someone in the secretariat, for instance, in the relevant committees in parliament. We do that. And that's a way of kind of also get a feeling or some feedback, right? What we are proposing, whether it's actually something that can go through on the EU side, gives us an opportunity to perhaps adjust a little bit as well. And we do see, for instance, that there is quite a lot of focus also on this kind of when the platforms make decisions with reference to their terms and conditions. For instance, this issue raised with editorial content. That's something that others as well are concerned about in Council and in Parliament. But it's all about the nitty-gritty details in the end, how it's formulated. It's a very difficult area that you move into, but But it's an example, perhaps, where we can manage to find some common ground. And the second question was about the
regarding if there are any, if the EEA EFTA states have any typical allies on digital policy.
Typical allies. Also, very very good question. I mean, we do perhaps look a bit because these are so important proposals and there are so many positions paper looking around. We do look at what some of the Nordic countries are writing, what they are giving of input. We also look at countries like the Netherlands, of course, France, Germany as well are doing very thorough assessments of these proposals that we consider. It's an interesting question because also in light of what happened with Brexit and all of that, there is kind of new constellations emerging in this area. Something we didn't see so much earlier, for instance, Netherlands and France cooperating on common positions, for instance, on some of these issues under this act. We do see it now. So it's also for us to kind of be conscious about this, that it's perhaps moving a little bit. The picture, there were some traditional allies perhaps to us are not there, or there are new constellations emerging. Yeah.
Okay, we have our last question from the chat, from the online viewers. Could you say something about the different views on harmful content within the EU and the discussion on prohibition of micro-targeting ads or content in the EU Parliament?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big discussion. What kind of we have discussed so far, and there seems to be quite a general agreement that it's difficult perhaps to regulate harmful content or agree at an EU level of what should be regulated or banned as kind of harmful content, any kind of obligations that it should be removed. I mean, there's a lot of branch norms on this already. There's a lot of cooperation, and of course there's also quite a lot of sector-specific regulation, but it's all related to kind of illegal content, child sexual abuse material, terrorist content. But when it comes to harmful content, it's kind of, as the DSA also proposes, for instance, with regard to disinformation, which is a very hot topic, that you do have this kind of systemic risk approach, that you see that the platforms that are very big and play a crucial role, for instance, in disseminating disinformation, that they do have more transparency obligations, reporting requirements, etc., but that you don't address it through regulation.
So, Trond, again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.